Well, hello. Welcome, everyone. We'll give everybody just a second to come on in and join us for a really awesome topic tonight for our town hall. As we give everybody a second to come in, feel free to say hi in the chat and tell us where you're from. And as you're coming in, if anyone wants to drop in the chat, it's almost Halloween, your favorite thing to do for Halloween. If you have a family tradition, anything that you particularly like. And while we're waiting for some folks to come in and start dropping in the chat, I wonder, Jelani, Marisa, or Chad, do you have any favorite Halloween traditions from growing up?
I don't particularly have any traditions, but I am a probably rare candy corn lover. So any of my candy corn lovers in the chat? Yeah.
More of a Twix kind of gal. I just love dressing up. Just any excuse to dress up.
Similar. I like collecting candy too. So I always think now that I'm an adult and I take my kids around, like it's one of the coolest days. Like you knock on your neighbors' doors, they say hi, hey, have some candy, and you get to meet people. And I just wish we could have like there's a Sweethearts Day in October. I wish there was like a spring Halloween.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of my favorite too. And I love dressing up as a kid. I was one of those folks who tried to still go out as a 12th grader because I thought it was like super cool to go around in a costume. Though neighborhood folks might not have been thrilled with that. But now as an adult, I love the kids coming by and you get to see everybody in your neighborhood and it's awesome. So okay, well, awesome. That gave hopefully folks a second to come in. As folks continue to come in, please go ahead and say hi. Oh, I was looking at the private chat. I missed. We have lots of stuff here. We have Canada. We have lovers of candy corn.
Oh man, so it's less rare than I thought.
So right. Less rare. Nightmare Before Christmas. Fun fact: I dressed up like Sally 2 years ago for my students and painted like my whole body blue. So there's always stuff you can do. Heath bars, egg rolls. Yes, lots of things. Okay, awesome. So I think folks are starting to come in here. I'm going to go ahead and give a little disclaimer and then we're going to get started. So this live stream is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you're in distress or feel unsafe. If you're in a crisis or if you're ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the suicide prevention hotline at 800-273-8255. It's also important to note that we want to create as safe a space as possible. So we encourage everyone in the chat to please be kind and respectful of one another. We love seeing you comment and really advocate in the chat and support one another. So we encourage that just in a respectful way. Also keep in mind that this is being broadcast on all sorts of social media platforms. So please be mindful of that as you ask personal questions, knowing that is out there. But at the end of the day, we are all here to support one another. We encourage you to ask questions through our time together. And even as we do some intros, if you all want to go ahead and start adding questions, we'll be sure to get to those as soon as possible as we start to tackle this really, really important topic of values. So before we dive into those questions, I want to introduce some of our awesome experts that are here today. So we're super excited to have Dr. Chad Wetterneck, who is a licensed clinical psychologist who serves as the clinical director of trauma recovery services at Rogers Behavioral Health, where he developed the adult trauma recovery programs at the residential, partial hospital, and intensive outpatient levels of care. Dr. Wetterneck completed his doctorate in clinical psychology at UW-Milwaukee with specializations in child psychopathology and advanced statistics, and completed his internship at Baylor College of Medicine and the Menninger Clinic. He also holds adjunct faculty appointments at Marquette University and UW-Milwaukee, and is the founders of the Recovery from OCD, Anxiety, and Depression, The Road. He has published over 80 peer-reviewed articles and has co-authored a book on assessment and treatment of sexual presentations for OCD and has been grant-funded for studies on treatment outcome. Dr. Wetterneck has spoken at national and international conferences on OCD, PTSD, interpersonal intimacy, and multicultural training, and won awards for research and teaching, including the Baylor College of Medicine Research Award and Most Outstanding Educator and Counseling at Marquette University. He is a member of a number of organizations, including the IOCDF, and he was recently made an IOCDF Behavior Therapy Training Institute faculty member. So super excited to have you. That's awesome. And I know you're going to bring so much to our discussion tonight.
Thank you.
Then we also have Dr. Marisa T. Mazza, who is a clinical psychologist and founder of Choice Therapy Psychological Services Incorporated. Dr. Mazza and her team provide evidence-based therapy and consultation via telehealth in California. Her areas of specialty include ACT, ERP, and OCD. She has published the ACT workbook for OCD and is faculty at the University of San Francisco and IOCDF Behavior Therapy Training Institute. So welcome. We're so glad to have you. And I know I shared this before, but as a sidebar, for anyone watching, the ACT workbook for OCD is awesome and really changed the course of my therapy and treatment and helped me turn a corner. So for anyone who is interested in our topic tonight, that's definitely something to check out. And then finally, we have Jelani Daniel, who is a doctoral student in a combined clinical and school psychology program at the University of Houston, Clear Lake, and is currently working as a practicum student at Psychology Houston PC. Prior to his return to graduate school, he worked as a licensed professional counselor in private practice, specializing in the treatments of patients with anxiety, OCD, and related disorders. Overall, he has 15 years of experience working with this population and has worked at various OCD treatment facilities, such as the Menninger Clinic, Baylor College of Medicine, and the Houston OCD program, now known as the McLean OCD Institute of Houston. He also volunteers his time to serve as a moderator for support groups in Houston related to OCD and hoarding disorder, and he serves as a member of the IOCDF's Diversity Advisory Council. In lieu of today's talk, the values he most pursues at this time relate to being a loving and empathetic husband and father, growing through self-development, living freely, and daring greatly. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. And ironically, do I have it sitting right here? Oh, I guess I don't. I had daring greatly actually sitting right next to me by Brene Brown at some point over here. But it's great to have all of you here. And for anyone who's watching that I don't know, I'm Katie O'Dunn. Katie is perfectly fine. I always put my clergy title. I'm an interfaith chaplain, but I like to put the Reverend on streams just so folks know that ministers, clergy, folks like that do struggle with clinical mental health diagnoses as well. And I am an interfaith chaplain who does have OCD. I have the pleasure of serving as a lead advocate for the IOCDF around initiatives related to faith and mental health. And as always, just want folks to know that they are not alone and that clergy, counselors, teachers, we are all in that boat together. So just want to make that clear as we get into tonight and talk about values, something that's been very instrumental in my recovery. So as we get into our talk tonight, would definitely encourage, and I see so much love in the chat for, and I see Caitlin. Thank you, Caitlin. I think you're the bee's knees too. I see a lot of love in the chat for so many of our amazing folks here tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and start jumping into some questions on values. But I encourage all of you watching to please start loading questions that you have into the chat about OCD, about living a value-driven life, any of those things, and we're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. But before we get into that, I would love to just ask really each of you, since we're talking about this tonight, when we talk about values, what are we talking about? When you're thinking about values, what does that mean? How might you explain those things to clients? How do they figure out what their values are? So what does that look like? Marisa, I'll throw it to you first.
Sure. When I think of values, I think of guiding principles. I think of what we wish for, what we desire most for ourselves. They're not shoulds, who we should be, what we should be into, what society, culture, our families tell us. They're more about our deeply held wants for ourselves. So that's what I think of in terms of values.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, Chad, do you have anything to add to that?
I really liked what Marisa said. And I might add that, they are, it's like a compass that we get to set and we get to determine which way is, north, south, east, and west. And we can try out different things to see. It's not just about how we feel about them. It's really, does it provide some sort of fulfillment to us? Does it move us towards something that we think is important?
Absolutely. And Jelani, go ahead.
Yeah. And sorry, I'm in some automatic lights, so sometimes you might see them go on and off. But yeah, so what I'll add to that is I like to look at values as a way of how one likes to live their life, like a way of being. And I think sometimes people may confuse, or misconstrue like values with goals, and that values don't have an endpoint, and it's something that we can constantly pursue. Whereas goals, like we look at different domains, like look at the domain of family, or the domain of like education. A goal can be to have a family, to have kids, to get married, to earn a degree. But values are things that we can pursue within those domains that don't end, like looking to be, like I mentioned earlier, that was mentioned earlier in my introduction, like being able to be a loving spouse or a father and whatnot, something that doesn't end. So looking at a way of being, way of acting, so like being able to be courageous in one's life, looking to be authentic and valuing connection and moving toward connection. So that's the ways that I like to look at values, and something that gives us vitality, gives us meaning, purpose, all those things.
Thank you. And I love that you acknowledge that it's not about this goal. It's not about this thing that we're trying to accomplish or this place that we're trying to get, that there's kind of this ongoing process. So I wonder, when you work with clients and they're saying, well, how do I figure out what my values are? What do values actually mean? Do you have some examples or some ways that you help your clients kind of navigate what values might look like for them? And Chad, I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts on that.
I guess I've heard about it in a few different ways. I'll just share one so I don't steal anyone else's work. One thing that I might ask people, and this is from some other folks that worked in ACT, where they said, if you can pose a question of, if you had unlimited resources, whether that be money or something else, what would you choose to do with it that you think would be meaningful to you? And that allows people to kind of like dream big and think, well, anything could be possible. And then we might refer to that in therapy as like the magic wand. If you could wave it, what would happen? And that's not realistic for a lot of folks, right? Because, well, very few of us are flying off in Jeff Bezos' rocket ship. And anyway, so you try to say, well, if you could do all that, like, let's say you'd say, I'd end hunger. Okay, what would be important about that? Well, I'd make people feel cared for and acknowledged. So if we were to trim that down, then, well, what if you had a set amount of resources, something a little bit more realistic? You won a small lottery, maybe it's $10,000. What would you do with that to help fulfill that goal? That was part of your dream big goal. And then even reducing it down to, what if you just had what you had now? What would be a step you could take in order to fulfill that? And if people don't know, it'd be like, well, how would you, who might you want to acknowledge? Who would be important to you to actually to try to show them that you care? And they might pick someone and be able to do something, whether it's write a note to them or call them or text them, something sweet. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, and I wonder, and Jelani, you might be able to chime in for this. When we're thinking about those values, when we're thinking about picking things that that make us feel that way, why is that so important as a part of OCD treatment?
Ooh, good question. I think so. A lot of times when it comes to with OCD, I think it can be very difficult for people to separate themselves from their OCD and getting very lost in who they want to be. And with OCD, it tends to pull you away from what you really, how you want to live and how you want to be as a person, and the things that are important to you. So, so values becomes very important, as was mentioned earlier. I think Chad had mentioned, in terms of like giving you like a compass and giving you a direction, and helping you realize that the way that OCD tends to lead you is not really in that way that is what you really truly value and is what is most important to you. So instead, let's look to be able to make decisions that can lead us more in this direction and guide us in the direction that we, of the type of life that we really want for ourselves.
Absolutely. Marisa, do you have anything to add to that, where how OCD comes into play here?
Absolutely. I think One of the most beautiful things about values is that they're flexible. There's many different ways of living our values. There's many different ways of being loving, of educating ourselves, right? OCD is kind of the opposite, right? It's like pretty rigid. OCD, encourages people to react and respond in similar kind of patterns and similar, just rigid ways. And so when folks come to me, OCD is typically already loud. There's a strong voice, there's a strong presence. And one of the things I do earlier on in treatment is really focus in on giving a voice to those values. What gives that person a sense of meaning and purpose, in life. And there's lots of different ways of doing it. I love what Chad had offered earlier. There's also a value card sort. That is great. You can go through these different cards and kind of identify it. There's also experiential ways of having people connect to their values and the felt sense. So, even right now, you can maybe think of a time in your life that just felt complete. Nothing needed to be added, nothing needed to be taken away. And if you bring yourself back to that point, just noticing like, what was it about that point in your life that was meaningful? What about it in terms of the quality of your actions, how you were showing up? What was most important to you in that moment? And how can we get more of that now? I think OCD and anxiety often keeps folks focused on the future and maybe possibly missing out on something important to them in the future. And one of the things I think values and mindfulness can do is bring us back to the here and now. Is how can we do that thing that's so very important to you now?
And if I could piggyback on that, yeah, I love what Marisa was just saying, and I think also that to go along with that, like another idea. Actually, she mentioned the values card, so I did that with a client today too. Actually, there's a cheap app that you can get that's just called Values Card Sort, that can make that really easy to do for anybody to do. But another idea, kind of going along with like some metaphors and can become a bit experiential, is like being able to think about like 80th birthday, or some birthday far in the future, or the other example is like, if you want to get more morbid, it's like think about your funeral and like people are there. But I like to be more positive, think about a birthday that's far in the future, and imagine all the people that you would like to be there, whether they could or not, like kids or that may not be here, or people who have already passed. But what would you like for people to be able to say about you at that type of event? Like, what would you like them to say? Like, they were this type of person, they lived this type of life, they went for it, so on and so forth, they took risks, whatever. Like, and so think about the things that you would like for people to be able to say about you, and be able to then think about how can you lead that type of life. Like, are you doing that now? And if not, what changes can you make to be able to lead you in that direction that could be more the fulfilling life that you want for yourself, and that you see that others noted of how you lived.
I love that. It reminds me of, we talk a lot with our students where I work about eulogy values versus resume virtues, and kind of what that means and looks like of those things that you really want people to know and remember about you, of the things that were important throughout your life. Chad, I wonder, do you have any other thoughts about why this might be important as we have conversations around OCD?
One thing I noticed about OCD early on, and this is when I first started getting into ACT, was we talk a lot about what you shouldn't do. So, we have our do your exposures, right? Challenge fears, move toward fears. And then we have and don't do the rituals. So we're keeping track of all this stuff. And as a graduate student, I always wondered, well, what do you do after that? And, for some people, it's like, oh, you go back to what you were doing before OCD took over your life. And then it's, what about the folks that have had OCD since they were 7 or 12, and it really interfered with their development? So I always wanted to add something like that to treatment, because we're really good at knowing what you shouldn't do. What are you doing all of this for? Can you practice that along the way while doing your exposure work?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. And I actually, Ethan, who just commented on the chat, we talk about all the time of how when you move into recovery, for some, it's like, I don't know, it's like you got kicked off the side of a school bus and end up on the side of the road and don't know how to live your life because you've never maybe been living a value-driven life. You've been living for the OCD as opposed to the things that are really important to you. So I think what you're saying and being able to figure out, well, what does that look like through my treatment? It gives you something to do after when you're saying, well, I'm no longer stuck in this cycle. So what do I actually want my life to be, and what do I want my life to look like? I know we're starting to get some questions in the chat, so y'all can keep putting those in. But before we get into that, I wanted to pull in the ACT piece, as I know that is very big for many folks here today. And Marisa, I wanted to start with you because you have a whole book on this topic. I wonder, what is ACT, and how can that really relate to OCD, and how are our values really a part of ACT when we're talking about acceptance and commitment therapy?
Sure. So like just a quick and brief definition of ACT. It's the willingness to experience what is in the service of doing what matters to you. So willingness to experience all thoughts, all feelings, all sensations, while spending your time doing the things that are in your heart that matter most to you. And, in terms of values, it's a key component. It's one of the processes of ACT. The goal of ACT is to increase psychological flexibility. And according to ACT, one of the ways in doing that is actually spending time exploring the person's values, having a clear sense of what does matter to them, and then really noticing like how much time are they spending on their values. I don't know if y'all have ever read The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris, but yeah, one of the things I like that he talks about is some of the research on happiness. And I think a lot of us are kind of walking around with this myth that like most people are happy most of the time. And when you actually look at the research, it says otherwise, right? Like most people are not happy most of the time. They're walking around with a range of different emotions. And the other interesting parts of the research is that when the people that are focused on feeling happy are actually the most dissatisfied. The people that are focused on living a happy life, focused on doing what matters to them, purposeful, meaningful things, they are actually the happiest. Right? So when I'm working with folks using ACT, I'm sort of thinking about like how, Michael Tuhig had quoted at one of the conferences, IOCDF conferences, that the research shows that folks living their values about 60 to 70% of the time tend to be the happiest, right? So as a clinician, the way I see it is I want to tackle OCD from two different angles. One, I want to get really good at having unwanted experiences, difficult thoughts, difficult feelings by using exposure. And two, I also want to get really clear on what the person's values are and how they want to be spending their time. If they're not doing compulsions, then what are they doing?
I'm so glad you brought up, and I see folks resonating in the chat with the happiness trap as well. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And I think I'm curious what Jelani and Chad have to say about this. But I hear that often in my chaplain role too. I deal with grief and trauma often, and folks come into my office and just say, well, I want you to make me happy again. I just want to be happy. I just want to try to be happy. And we have a conversation often along the lines actually of ACT and about feeling the full range of emotions and experiences, and also living into your values, where it becomes less about just check, I want to be happy, and more about contentment and being able to be in that space wherever you are and whatever that looks like. So Chad or Jelani, I wonder what thoughts you might have about ACT and about how that might fit in with some of what we're talking about tonight with OCD.
Yeah, so, excuse me. Yeah, so it's, sorry, I'm like losing my train of thought a little bit. I was like thinking about what you were saying as well as the questions.
I If you want me to jump in, let me know.
Yes.
All right, I want to give you right of first refusal here. So how does ACT fit in with OCD treatment?
Yeah.
I mean, I often talk about it from, I feel like I have my PowerPoint slide here right now. You know, like most people are coming in to treatment because they have this, some sort of a psychological distress, emotion that they'd rather not be in contact with. You know, it's kind of like big and it's bothersome, and you know they take all these different directions. They go wherever they can, you know. But the thing is, all it does is it just pulls the psychological distress and pain along with them. So we have techniques, we have exposure work that we know can result in habituation or extinction processes that can probably shrink, you know, how big this emotional distress is. But we can't take it all away because we're human, and they're important signals to have these emotions. So what we're going to do is, while we're teaching them these strategies, and this is kind of like what I was referencing before, we tell them, do this, shrink this, that's good, that's good. Well, what do they do in the meantime? And it's like, let's give them the direction. This is where the compass is. So this is like my values part here. So as you're working on this and doing your exposure work, we always want to be heading over in this direction as well. Now the V is going to keep moving too, but we're going to keep following it and keep moving on over. Jelani, did I buy you enough time?
I have to remember what we're talking about. So I think also it goes along with something I was mentioning earlier and ties in, I think, with something else that someone else had just stated. Might have been Marisa, but you know, like, so if there's a focus more actually with what you were just saying, Katie, and with if there's a focus on more like materialistic, or if we're looking at terms of like happiness, a lot of people think that you just attain happiness by just having things, and so but oftentimes what you'll see is like, okay, if somebody wants all the cars and money and all these materials and relationships and whatnot, and think like that's going to bring happiness, and you still can find people who have everything feeling very unhappy, and that's because of there's this more focus on just attaining and possessing and these goals that end up being very empty and unfulfilling. It's not very, it doesn't last long term. It's that short term, you know, gratification. And so with values, again, since they persist and be something you can constantly pursue, you can then find fulfillment long term in this way. And so, and going along with this and what we've been talking about, so like that willingness piece has been mentioned here, is very important. And that, you know, in having something that you're going to pursue, it can be very difficult to move in that direction because there's, you know, discomfort. Like, oh, I know it'd be good if I challenge myself to do something that I really don't want to do, but I don't like this feeling. But if we can work on having the willingness to have that experience while, you know, pursuing what's important and going after what matters, we can find fulfillment and can find, like, I also like to say, like, one can build their emotional muscle, and learning how to be able to have emotions, become stronger and being able to do so by actually experiencing it. You know, compare that to actually our physical muscles. If we don't engage them, then, you know, our muscles will weaken and atrophy. But in order to build up more, you know, tolerance and ability to have and experience our emotions, we need to actually have them. We need to have experiences instead of avoiding it. And so in the process of moving toward what matters, you're going to experience things that are uncomfortable and getting out of your comfort zone. And so it can help you to build that emotional muscle and help you learn how to be able to have these experiences instead of kind of getting trapped or hindered by them by like avoiding and pushing away and, you know, doing compulsions to try to feel better in that short period, as opposed to, you know, moving towards something that's difficult, or moving towards something that's important while also experiencing something that's difficult. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing.
No, and I think it's actually a great lead into a question that Ethan asked, because we're thinking about, okay, what does it look like to move towards something that's meaningful? But I know for some folks, it comes up where it seems like there's conflicting values, either as a part of their treatment or as a part of what it is they're doing following treatment. So at 7:20, Ethan says, I always find the more difficult decisions revolve around having to choose between conflicting values. Mm-hmm. Although that's a win-win in many ways, do you have suggestions on other things I can identify that help determine which value decision is better in that moment. Time sensitive, other directed, etc. Of course, still being willing to make the wrong choice and being okay not making the perfect decision. So any thoughts? Marisa, I see you nodding, so I'll throw it to you first.
Yeah. I mean, while you can lean into the uncertainty of not knowing if you're making the right choice, I would say it's not a matter of which value to focus on. It's a matter of how much time do you spend on each, right? I agree. I think oftentimes it is a really difficult decision when two values are going head to head, but it doesn't have to be either or. It's like, how much time and energy am I going to spend on each? And you can sort of zoom out. That may be years, that may be months. For example, when I had my son, I purposely chose to work less in the service of being more present with him and having more time for my family for the first 3 years of his life. Whereas at other points in my life, I chose to focus more on my career. That's what came up for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I love that personal example. And I think that's great. Go ahead. Was that Chad or Jelani actually that chimed in? Okay, go ahead, Jelani.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I agree with what Marisa was saying. And the way I like to look at it is trying to develop some balance, because in many ways, I think it depends on the moment, especially because our values can change over time, right? And so it's not like once when you find out what your values are, like that's all that they are. They can change. For me personally, it's being in this doctorate program, as well as I have a son, I'm married, and so I have all these different things that I'm trying to juggle and trying to, like what Marisa was saying, like trying to see like how much time you can put in each one, and so like trying to develop some balance as to what one personally feels is best for them. And so like for me, I think, again, with similar to what Marisa was saying, I made some decisions to maybe take like less emphasis off of school and put more emphasis on being able to spend time with my son and my wife, because I feel like it's more important to do so at this time in his life and in our lives than to make some sacrifices in some other areas of my life. So I think it's going to be personal for everybody. It's going to differ, but again, just trying to find that balance and seeing just based on like how you see it's going to work out for you. If you want to, if it's important at this time to be more focused on, say, career, then go for it. If it's more important to focus on family life or connections and social life and things of that sort, because that's something that maybe you're missing, then find some time and energy to invest more in that area. So that's the way I view it. And so I don't know what other perspectives others may have.
Yeah, Chad, do you have any thoughts on conflicting values and figuring out where to go?
Yeah, I like to call that the values crossroad. You can often only choose to go in one direction. And a couple of things that I'll look at is I might ask a person, well, which value do you have a lot of experience in pursuing? Because there's one that might always be kind of like the path not taken. I'd like you to develop some practice in working in that area. I look at almost all behavior as potentially values-based, or people can develop values. Even people's ritualizing, that could be a value of safety. I'm trying to move towards safety, even though that's kind of like a state. But you have a lot of experience in moving towards safety. Do you have a lot of experience in trying to take risks and trying to be courageous? So do that. Another practical thing that you could do is, if you're working with clinicians that use measures, and especially ACT-friendly measures, there's something called the Valued Living Questionnaire, and it asks about a number of different important areas of life. Cool thing is you can decide which areas are most important to you, and you would rate them like from 1 to 10, 10 being most important and 1 not so much. And then try to assess like on a weekly basis, how much of your time and effort have you put toward trying to achieve values in that area? And you might notice that you're consistent in some areas, whereas there's larger discrepancies when you rate how important something is to how much time you've put into it. So for some people, and I realize anything can turn into a ritual, but for some people that can help clarify a little bit of, I'm really not doing much in this area, or I really don't take that path very often. So I should try to practice flexibility and try it out.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, and then we'll get into another question here, but this is really a question for me, and what you're bringing up raises this. We so often with OCD talk about the way that OCD kind of latches on to our values in some way, shape, or form. So I'm wondering what advice you would give to someone seeking to live into their values while OCD is simultaneously latching on. And I'll say an example for me. I work with students and I work with faith. So as a school chaplain, I had many years where I was really struggling with thoughts around harm and thoughts around whether or not I was a dangerous or a bad person. And on one hand, the OCD was very much latching onto my values, which meant that I cared so much about my students. But if I didn't move towards the values of wanting to be the best that I could be for my students by going through treatment, I never would have gotten back to that point either. But I think OCD can make it really tricky while simultaneously saying, oh, you can't move in this direction that's important to you because your values are telling you that does that make sense? There's this kind of dichotomy when OCD is latching on. So I wonder what thoughts you might have about that. Go ahead, Chad. I can tell you're like, yes.
Okay. So I'll give you a short version of a metaphor I often use, which is talking about your values garden of life. And so that you can choose to plant seeds in different areas, and those seeds can have different names, which actually are the names of your values. And for people with OCD or even other anxiety conditions, a lot of times if you looked in their garden of values, what you would see is, a really large tree that's plotted in like a safety area, like I value safety. And that's where the avoidance and the ritualizing comes in. And it might overlap a couple of domain areas. Like I'm trying to keep myself safe. If I fear contamination, I'm trying to, not hurt anyone else. So that I feel like I'm caring for them. But if I look at everywhere else and all the other domains, I might see a couple of areas where I, put in a little shovel and plant some seeds, but I never really watered it because I was working on my big tree of safety. And so it's about trying to notice that what are you sacrificing? And then there's a lot of ways to look at this. So I'm interested to hear what the other two folks have to say too. But one is, are you putting all of your eggs in this one basket and you're not allowing yourself to really foster and care for the other areas of your life?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, go ahead, Jelani.
Yeah. So, one thing I would say, the main thing is really looking at how OCD doesn't really pull you in the direction of your value. Like it may, in the example that you brought up, Katie, is like, you're wanting to be the best for your students, but if OCD or whatnot is saying well, you need to protect them and you need to like stay away from them or do these certain behaviors, and seeing how that pulls you away from being able to engage with your students in the way that you want and being able to be the type of, guide for them in the way that you're in the way that you would like. So OCD doesn't really, it may really OCD tends to latch on, as you said, to the things that are most important. Because if it latched on to things that weren't important, then it'd be like, okay, this doesn't matter to me. I could either just let this go. But that's why it is such a significant struggle, because it goes along with the things that are important to a person. And so, but it's important to recognize how it actually doesn't lead you toward that. If you're saying like, I want to protect kids because I don't want to be around, if I have hardened obsessions and I feel like I'm going to hurt my kids, then I need to stay away from knives. I need to stay away from doing all these things. But then that might pull one away from like being the loving, caring mother or, father or whatnot that they want to be. So recognize how it actually pulls you away from these values instead of actually bringing you toward it.
And I love that you bring that up, because it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like your OCD latches on to that thing that's so important to you, and you're trying to protect it. And by way of trying to do these compulsions, you're actually getting further and further away from that value or that thing that you're trying to protect. But I do think it's important for folks that are here watching tonight to hear, because I've had this conversation probably 10 times in advocacy this week, that the things that you might be obsessing about most likely those are things that are connected to your values, but your OCD a lot of times is flipping those in a way that you're not living into your values. You're just obsessing about something that's maybe important to you. So there's a possibility of flipping the script by really living into those values. So Marisa, I wonder what thoughts you might have about kind of how all this fits together.
Yeah, I mean, just based off of what you were just saying, the question that sort of came up for me is like, if you're having a particular obsession or feeling a really uncomfortable kind of feeling, maybe just getting a little curious about it and asking yourself, well, what might this thought or what might this feeling be trying to remind me of that's actually quite important to me? Mm-hmm. Right. I think the typical response is to avoid and move away from those difficult emotional experiences. But if we're willing to be with them, they can actually be a beautiful reminder of what actually matters to us.
Oh yeah, and I don't want to take credit. There was a clinician on here at some point that said this, so this is not me. But the idea of following kind of a string or a rope back from your obsession to your values, if OCD is making you question who you are, of being able to say, well, you know, I'm having a lot of obsessions about my newborn, or I'm having a lot of obsessions about my spouse. And that's a really, in terms of what you're saying, to be curious about that and say, well, maybe it's because those things are really important to me. Maybe I really care about them. Maybe I can really find how to live into that, not in the way that the OCD is telling me to, but in the way that my values are directing me.
Absolutely, and in a good enough way. That's the other piece I was going to add is, I think the other way OCD can hijack values is with perfectionism, putting so much energy and time into maybe even living values perfectly, and at what cost, right? At what cost? So we talk a lot about gently striving for values, not putting in too much energy or too little. Good enough.
Good enough. I love that. Well, we have some great questions coming in about how this relates to ERP as well. So Beth at 725 says, and Beth, first of all, I'm so sorry for your experience. Beth says, I'm not doing anything except hiding out. I'm afraid to be near anyone now. With the exception of getting my food and taking out my trash, I'm living an almost zero value-driven life. So Beth, I'm so sorry that you're experiencing this, and we appreciate you sharing. So it looks like you have been working very hard implementing ERPs, and you're hoping that all of these mountains will be behind you someday because it's exhausting. So I wonder for our group here, what advice we might give of how this values work, how these conversations around ACT and living into your values might fit with someone who is doing exposure and response prevention, maybe for the first time. How can that give you motivation as you're moving through your treatment? Go ahead, Chad. Oh, Jelani. Sorry, Jelani's like,
yeah. Well, because actually I was talking about this not too long ago with actually part of a support group. Where it can be, especially when the work is so difficult. So doing exposures, of course, will bring about discomfort, distress, so on and so forth, and things that are very unwanted. At the same time, though, it's important to remember why you're doing this. You're not doing it just for the sake of learning how to feel uncomfortable, although that's part of it, but it's for also like learning you're doing this for the sake of being able to move toward the life that is worth living to you. Because right now, with the way that OCD is and it has like taken over, the way that OCD can take over one's life and limit it so significantly, you're not living in many ways, it's not, you're not even living, you're just like surviving at times when it can get so severe. And so being able to keep the values in mind, and like the way I like to describe it to people often is saying, like, keep your eyes on the prize, like your values in that path, like keeping, your focus on that path is what can help guide you through this, even when like the times are so difficult and OCD is rearing its ugly head and making things very challenging for you. And ERP can be, a struggle and can be difficult to engage in, but keeping your eyes on the prize, that this is what you're moving toward, that'll help you pull you out of the pit or out of the muck and the mess that OCD really tends to keep you in.
I love that. And I love that visual of kind of pulling you out of the muck, which is really what OCD does, is get you stuck. And these values can kind of give you this lifeline to keep moving through some treatment when it's really hard. Chad, what thoughts do you have on this, the ERP alongside values?
I kind of want Marisa to go next.
Okay, Marisa, go ahead.
Twice already. Okay.
I'm happy to, if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I was just thinking about what Jelani said, and it reminded me, sometimes my clients will post reminders of their values. They found that really, really helpful. Pictures of their values. They'll do vision boards, or even just the word. Sometimes they'll write, when they have reminders going on their phone or their calendar, they'll write the value in there to remind them, like, what is this in the service of? Like, the mind is really good at making a lot of excuses and sort of talking ways, all the reasons of why we shouldn't do it. And so one response we could have back is, but what about doing this is actually important to me? What is this in the service of? And I think oftentimes too, like when we're feeling so stuck, it can be important to also think about the fact that, you know, the mind that is telling you and giving you these obsessions is the same mind that's telling you you can't do this. Mm-hmm. And the only way you'll know if you can is if you try. And so it's hard, but maybe keeping some of these values in mind can help us take that risk.
Absolutely. I don't know what we can really add to that, because that's just for everyone listening here. That's such great motivation to say, okay, we can really try. We can take this leap. We can take this risk. So along those lines, I'd actually love to throw this back to Marisa, who's giving us some really great advice here for folks who might be trying to navigate treatment, who might be trying to navigate therapy, or even finding someone to help them with ACT. So Van Rendon Vasquez at 728 says, do you need a therapist for following the ACT treatment, or are there also self-guided strategies and therapeutic tools to conduct ACT without a professional provider? And I know you have a great resource, Marisa, and I was wondering if you could speak to that.
This is when I feel uncomfortable. So yes.
Living in your values.
I know. I have to talk about my book. So yes. So I mean, a part of the reason why I published the ACT workbook for OCD was a part of it was my own learning. I was formerly trained as a very traditional ERP therapist and found it confusing and hard to learn ACT. I wasn't sure how to integrate them. And the way that I saw it is they're similar. Like ERP and ACT are both exposure-based treatments, and they can be used very well together. So you're welcome to check out the ACT workbook for OCD. I'm trying to think if there's any ACT-related apps. I think NOCD, No OCD, was trying to incorporate some ACT into their app. I'm not sure if they quite did it or not, but I don't know. Can you all think of any other apps?
I don't know any. Yeah, no, I don't know any offhand.
All you techies out there, there's room for an app.
And Marisa, I want to tease you a little. Like, there's a few other books out there, but I don't want to recommend any of them but yours. No. But there's a few that talk about mindfulness and OCD, and I think someone from IOCDF posted that in the chat as well. And gosh, I think you could look at, get out of your mind, get into your life, which for another resource. I like the chapters that they have there on values. Yep. And it's not OCD specific, but for many of you, you're not just struggling with OCD either. So it, can really apply to kind of a broad base there too. I think, we brought up Russ Harris's name. He puts out a lot of videos.
Yeah.
So if you go on YouTube and look on his YouTube channel, there's just examples of how he demonstrates, various concepts, various metaphors. And I think some of those can be helpful too. I do think that being able to have a therapist that at least is ACT friendly or ACT knowledgeable along with a workbook might be the best combo that you could do.
Yeah, and Chad, I'm glad you brought that up, and I think there are so many awesome resources out there. Of course, first and foremost, I want to promote Marisa's because it really was helpful for me. But I know there are so many great things out there, and I'm always a big proponent of folks doing this alongside seeing a therapist, and with OCD, particularly working with exposure and response prevention. But for those who might be struggling, I hear from folks all the time with financial concerns and that really still want to dive into ACT. There really are some great resources where you can move through this in a meaningful way. But know that if you are able to seek treatment, even with ACT as a part of that, it can be helpful. I like to think I'm pretty comfortable with ACT, and I'm seeing someone right now specifically post ERP just to navigate ACT together. And I'm realizing that having someone help you implement that, even when you know strategies, is very, very different than just knowing what ACT means and what it looks like. So I think if you're able to do that, that could be great too. Jelani, do you have any thoughts on any resources or anything?
The only thing, a book that I thought was really, it's a really popular book. So Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Is a really incredible book that really, and for those who don't know who Viktor Frankl was, or actually I don't know if he's still alive or not. He survived the Nazi concentration camps, and was a creator, or at least one of the people who brought forth logotherapy, different just type of therapy, but he talks about in this book about how to be able to find meaning even when one is, when life is pretty dreadful and you think, like in that situation, that, under the impression that you're going to die at some point, within a very dire situation. So, but even in that type of situation, one can still find meaning and purpose. And so, and actually, it relates to a quote that I thought was really great. It says, like, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. So that was by Nietzsche. So like being able to, if you have a why, if you have that purpose, to really why you want to, what you're looking for, to why you want to pursue, what you want to pursue in your life. Jeez, I can't speak. But being able to have that value, that purpose, gives you meaning, and really seeing that having that meaning in life can be such an important part for all of us, whether you have OCD or mental illness or not. But that meaning in life is such an important thing for all of us to really guide us and lead us through the life we lead. So.
Thank you, Jelani. You're also making me think of David Kessler and the sixth stage of grief with finding meaning as well. And I know for those of you who were in the grief and trauma session at the conference, we were talking about that, and both navigating grief related to lots of different life experiences, but also related to navigating grief following a really difficult kind of journey with OCD, of being able to find and make meaning as you move forward in a value-driven way. So that's for folks navigating grief. That's another place to look as well. Getting back into values specifically at 7:30, Mateus says, how can we prevent this search for values becoming a compulsion in and of itself? How to avoid the OCD sufferer mindlessly invoking reminders of their values during an acute OCD episode. So I wonder, Jelani, can I throw this back to you?
Sure. I think that can relate to. So I wonder if it becomes a compulsion. It's like, what's the focus? Like, what do you? Are you trying to get like find the perfect value, and is there some perfectionism coming in that regard? So looking at that function, like, why is it becoming a compulsion? Are you really looking to try to live the life that worth living? Or are you trying to getting more focused on things having to be a certain way, having to be just right, so on and so forth? So I'm just looking over like the rest of the question. I think, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I love what you mentioned about even the perfection piece and not trying to get it right. And it kind of links back to what Marisa, even you were saying earlier about not trying to be perfect with how you're living out those values. If you have thoughts on that too.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think the key is to notice it, right? Like, I think the key is to notice when we're putting too much energy into anything. And usually when we're doing that, it's a fear-driven response, right? We're trying to escape or avoid something. And that's an opportunity to lean in. That's an opportunity to really kind of, step back and say, okay, like, what am I most fearful of right now? Like, what's the absolute worst case scenario here? And what's the hardest part about that? And I don't know, right? Like, I don't know if that would happen. And moving forward, like, what could good enough values work look like?
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on that, Chad?
Sure. Lots of cool concepts here already brought up. And I think back to what both Jelani and Marisa said about values earlier, where it's about balance. So we want to notice when we're out of balance. And then, of course, a lot of our folks with OCD can say, how do I know I'm in balance? What if I'm not in balance? And then the doubting comes up, right? So, it's going to come back to what's the function of why you're doing what you're doing. So it's not just about the specific behavior you're doing. What's the function of questioning yourself in this area? Is it to try to make sure you're doing it right? Because in that case, I feel like it's like a meta compulsion. And, that might be the exposure, is to accept that maybe I'm doing it right and maybe I'm not. But if you really were sure you were doing it wrong, it could be because you're trying to perfect it. And asking oneself, what's the function of what you're doing? It goes back to what we talked about with happiness as well. That sounds like such a noble pursuit, right? To try to be happy. But is it that people are pursuing happiness, or is it because I notice I'm not happy? It's an absence of happiness, or I have a feeling that I don't want to have. And one of our older ACT metaphors is about this rule beneath the skin, that we can control so much in the world, but the stuff that's inside of us, our thoughts, our feelings and sensations, when we try not to have that, the rule beneath the skin is, then you will have it.
And if I can add to that, I think, this office is with what Chad was saying. I think, so if people find themselves, if you focus on values for the purpose of like, I need to move in this direction so I can be happy, then you're setting yourself up for failure, in a sense of like, you're likely just going to be unhappy, because then you're doing something for the sake of, like, you're trying to control how you're feeling. You're trying to control the emotions and affecting a lot of control, where instead of need to let go. Especially in ACT, we work on trying to be able to let things be and not trying to affect so much control, and working on more of acceptance and willingness for how things are, in some regard. And so making sure to not engage in values for the purpose of I'm to be happy, but looking to have more in life and live more the way that you want to live, whether or not that means happiness. Like, focusing on values does not mean it's going to guarantee a positive outcome. Like, and it very well may not result in the way that you optimally or ideally would like it to, but being willing to accept what that outcome could be, while at the same time moving toward what matters most to you.
Thank you, Jelani. That y'all did such a great job answering that question. I think it also links into a little bit of something that Mary was navigating at 737. And Mary says, things that were totally against my values as the good, kind person that I am always have been. I am curious as to how to treat, how my real event OCD can be treated. And I think that I might have been, I think I was looking at another. I've seen Mary post a couple times about kind of the real event OCD, traumatic time in life, and kind of how to navigate this alongside values. And it's leading me to think about What happens when OCD makes you feel like you don't deserve to live into your values? And I think this comes up a lot. I know somebody was asking this on one of our IOCDF forums actually earlier today about OCD makes me feel like a bad person. It makes me feel like I don't deserve anything. So why would I deserve to move forward with my values? How might you respond to that? I wonder. What do you think, Marisa? Any thoughts on that?
I saw Chad's. Oh, this way.
Yeah.
I saw Chad's eyes glow.
This first one. And now I may have already forgotten the question. There's a lot of it depends here, and I'm not going to ask Mary to say exactly what the real event was, but OCD can seem quite powerful and convince us to do stuff to kind of check the reality of what fears it's presenting to us. So for some people, if they were afraid that a new parent is afraid they're going to touch their child inappropriately, for some of them it means I won't go near my child at all, and for others it's like I'm going to engage to see and check whether or not there's any sense of arousal that I have, or if they seem aroused, or if they cry at me, it probably means I did something wrong. And so like you could actually do things as you're doing like a checking compulsion, as you're doing some other type of compulsive behavior in the service of trying to not be a bad person. And then your OCD can turn it around on you and say, well, because you were checking and willing to risk, it must mean you don't really care about your kid. So I think part of it is just to recognize how much OCD can twist and turn everything, even as you're trying to solve the riddle it's presenting you.
Yeah, and I love the twisting and turning. I think becomes important for someone I was talking to earlier, and really in my own experience, I navigated a lot of times harm stuff, questions about the past. I know some folks refer to that as false memories, but really just obsessions about things that happened in the past that might not have really happened, or probably didn't happen. And for me, and I know a lot of others with that theme, I hear all the time, well, if I can never know for certain that I didn't do that thing, how in the world could I possibly move forward with my values? Like, I don't know if I deserve to move forward with my values. I don't know that I deserve to have this life because I can't fix whatever I don't know could have potentially happened in the past. So I wonder, Chad, would you say the same thing for that, of just recognizing that OCD twists things? How might you respond to that?
Yeah. So I think most of us in this panel, we've been taught that we try to help people develop their own values and they pick them themselves. And I know a lot of the ACT gurus will say, you can't influence them in any way. And I have a slightly different take on it, because a lot of people I work with, their whole life has been, some combination of OCD or other anxiety, depression, trauma. And I'm not giving them a life back. It's more like they need to build it up from wherever it's at right now. So I might suggest things that could be values that I think could be like pro-social and also taking care of themselves. So I might point out that if they could practice things like trust, courage, self-compassion, compassion to others, pride. I have a whole list of values that I might present and say, I think a lot of these values probably run counter to what OCD is telling you to do. So, feel free to try them on like they're gloves that you could wear, but not if you have contamination fears. Just see what they're like to try to do something different and not always listen to what OCD has to say.
Thanks, Chad. Marisa, any other thoughts on that when folks feel like, oh, I don't deserve to live into my values, or OCD is telling me that I don't deserve to live into values and live this beautiful life?
Yeah, I really like what Chad just said. And most people will choose some kind of value in the realm of love, kindness, compassion. I mean, the majority of folks tend to, at least that's what I've noticed. And so we're often really, really good at being compassionate and loving and kind to other people. And it's so much harder, not for everyone, but for a lot of us, it's so much harder for us to apply that to ourselves, right? And so, maybe Mary, one thing you could try on is sort of seeing, like, if a friend came to you and told you her story that was similar to yours, and said she was unworthy and undeserving of this, what might you say to that friend? And is that something what would that be like to say that to yourself? And this, sometimes I get the question of what's the difference between self-compassion and reassurance. And the way that I see it is self-compassion is not meant to make the pain go away, but it's really meant to help hug you through it.
Nice.
We're all deserving of love, of kindness. It's our birthright. And we all experience pain.
I really like that point that Marisa makes in terms of, really looking at this from a self-compassionate point. And I think something that I'll add too, just to this question is, if OCD is telling you that we're questioning whether or not like you're deserving to pursue certain values, one thing I would ask is, well, how much do you really want to continue to allow OCD to have a voice here? Like, does OCD deserve to be able to continue telling you what to do? Like, what about your voice? Like let's empower you and what you really, again, what you find to be important and whatnot. And let's let OCD have the back seat now. And let's start, I mean, we could use like the passengers on a bus metaphor in this case, so if OCD and some other things, emotions and thoughts and whatnot are the passengers, and they're constantly telling, like, you're driving the bus and they're telling you which way to go. You're the one driving. Like, why are we letting them and OCD guide you and direct you? Let you drive the bus and go where you want. Let them be the noisy backseat passengers, the backseat drivers that they might be, but let's leave them in the back while you're driving in the front.
And I would stop at the bus stop where forgiveness is hanging out and invite that value up on my bus.
I love that y'all are bringing self-compassion into this too. And it's something that is so important. And Marisa, like you said, of offering that same love and compassion that you would to someone else, which we're not that good at. And I know I'm not particularly all that good at. Even I was with my, it was a 5th grade class this week, and we were talking about actually self-compassion. And I was asking how students were feeling. And one student said, "Oh, I'm feeling super anxious." And I said, "Oh, so what can you say to yourself that you might say to a friend around you? What would be really helpful?" And they said, "Well, when I'm anxious, I usually just tell myself, suck it up and get over it." And I was like, "Oh, that and it made me so sad." And we had this conversation about what would you be saying to a friend. And I hope that folks are listening tonight are hearing also what Jelani is saying with passengers on the bus, of allowing all of those feelings, those thoughts, those emotions to be there, and saying like, "Hey, okay, that's nice. I'm still going to move toward my values, even if my OCD tells me like I don't deserve to." And it sounds like that's what Eric is saying at 7:36. And Eric says, "The voice of my OCD is extremely judgmental and critical and conflicts with my actual values. How do you affirm your actual values and beliefs in the face of a loud, self-critical inner voice?" And I know this comes up for a lot of folks with OCD, where there's that critical piece, and OCD is saying all of these different things that you're combating. So any thoughts about that? I'll let somebody jump in because I keep calling the wrong person first. But I'll be very compassionate with myself about it, so it's fine.
I mean, really, I think this applies to what we were just talking about in many ways. Of like, yeah, like the voice of OCD can be very loud and judgmental and critical. I think it can be helpful. Like, so a big part in ACT is like being able to change your relationship to your inner experiences, changing your relationship to how you view your thoughts, your emotions, sensations, so on and so forth. Instead of viewing them as things that really you need to respond to, like learning instead of like how to allow yourself to have them, and not looking so much to get like wrapped up and caught up in like the quicksand and the mess of it and the muck of it. And so, like OCD, if for one person finding themselves with having these judgmental or critical thoughts and this voice, it's like, okay, all right, that's your voice, OCD, but that doesn't mean like that's how like I have to give this thought any power or any acknowledgement as if this is true. Like being able to treat it as what it is. Like, all right, this is another thought. Yes, it may it may suck to, it may not feel good to have that thought, but again, I don't have to treat it as if this is something that bears any of my attention. So thank you, OCD, for that thought. And I'm going to move and focus on what is more important for me right now, and not let you continue to be the driver in my life as much as, and try to, as much as I can, and try to take the control for myself.
Well, and I wonder if you let it be there and let OCD do its critical thing, let it keep going, kind of wave at it and keep moving forward with your life. Does it ever get any quieter? Is it just always like that forever? What does that look like?
Yeah, and so I think also, it's also important, again, to apply the many things that others in this panel have said. So, about self-compassion, I think is very important too, and just being able to, because it can be easy to get caught up in those types of thoughts, and says, oh, you're a bad person for having these thoughts, and so applying another aspect of ACT is learning how to be able to diffuse, and that's what I'm saying in terms of having a different relationship is this diffusion. So it can easily get fused with the thoughts of oh, if I have these thoughts, I am a bad person, and it's oh, fused, but no, we want to be able to develop some separation from this, and that saying all right, this is OCD and this is me. Just because OCD says this or does this does not make this me. Just because I may have thoughts about harming my own kids doesn't mean I am a bad person or that I want to do this. So, again, creating some space to recognize that these are thoughts, these are not truths, right? And while also being self-compassionate and saying okay, I know I struggle with this, or I'm not a bad person for having these thoughts. Whether you have OCD or not, we all have intrusive thoughts, or at least, the research says most of us, but really I think we all do. And so being self-compassionate in that sense of realizing that I'm not the only one, I'm not alone in this, I'm not alone in this struggle, in this experience. So applying some of that common humanity here, and that I really share similar experiences, and I'm not as alone or bad and bizarre as I think I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually am more nervous about people who say they don't have intrusive thoughts, because I agree. I think everybody has weird thoughts, and anybody who says they don't, a little sketched out about that. So I wonder, this kind of goes into Meredith's question. I
think Chad wanted to say something.
Go ahead.
Can I just comment a couple things? Well, one, there is that research study that shows that 85% of people have intrusive thoughts and 15% of people are lying. So there's that. And then there's a couple of experiential exercises that I like to use with people. And sometimes it's for critical inner voices, and sometimes it applies to other things as well. And I used to call it the interesting exercise, but I let one of my clients rename it the patronizing exercise. Anyway, I still introduce it as the interesting exercise. And I use something called the old 2-chair technique, and I have them invite OCD to talk to them and say what they have to say. But I tell them that they're going to sit in their chair and pretend they're OCD talking to themselves, and they're going to say these things that are critical. And I want you to go back in your chair, and I want you to treat that like someone who, think about the zaniest person who comes up with the wildest ideas and is like, what we should do? We should just sell all of our material possessions and float around the world in a hot air balloon. And, how do you respond to that person if you're trying to be nice? You go, oh, interesting. Oh. And so I have them go over to the other chair, and I have them go, interesting. Then I have them go flop over and be OCD again and say the same stuff. So I have them develop some practice while actively allowing themselves to hear it. And then one of my clients really took it far and was like, oh, wow, what? Wow, that's so, yeah, sure. And so that's why he called it the patronizing exercise, because I'm patronizing OCD by even bothering to listening to it at all. The other thing is the way to give someone practice. There's another experiential exercise that I learned from the ACT folks, that's taking your mind for a walk. So you can do this with someone else. You can do this with your therapist. But the idea is to practice hearing something out loud where your client would walk around in the office, outside, and the therapist or whoever is being your mind will tell you what you're supposed to be doing right now. Like it might say, oh, look at the sun, it burns my eyes. and you decide, do I want to do that and look up at the sun and burn your eyes or not? Or you say, oh, look over there off in the bushes. I see 17 hummingbirds. And so you just give them practice hearing what is said, but there's a difference between hearing and listening. Listening would be hearing it and then following its instructions. Hearing it is just hearing it and still deciding which path do I want to walk on. And the longer version of that is the mind tells you where you should walk. You should turn left right here. You should climb up that tree. And then you just practice doing what you want to do. And I don't know, maybe you listen to your mind once or twice just to patronize it. But anyway, just some experiential stuff that I like to do.
I love those are awesome examples, and I can imagine sitting there and doing that. So I love that. That's awesome. I wonder, so Meredith at 7:39, kind of getting back into the values piece too, says, I feel like I know what my values and drives are, but my depression, anxiety, and OCD are such a large presence. I have to fight so hard to be the person I know I am inside. And I know we've addressed this a little bit, but Marisa, I would love to throw this to you and really talk about, well, what does it look like? How might you determine your values when OCD or when depression, when anxiety has defined your life for so long?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because there's the saying in therapy, sometimes we have to fake it till we make it. And it may be so hard, and you may not want to get out of bed or leave your house or do the things that you know are good for you. And sometimes it's literally just getting up, putting our feet where they need to go, and moving our bodies in the direction that's going to help us and sort of bring the depression and the OCD and all of the thoughts and experiences like in our book bag along with us for the ride. And it's easier said than done. And the same with practicing self-compassion, sort of tying it in the beginning when we're doing these new kinds of behaviors, when we're taking care of ourselves in these loving ways, it can feel strange. It can feel kind of weird and icky. And what can happen over time is, as we're practicing these new flexible, different behaviors, is we could surprise ourselves. And all of a sudden, like, wow, that was like a nice thought I had about myself, right? But it does take getting through some mud in the beginning to sort of get there and really notice what happens from this practice. And it's a practice. Mm-hmm. It's a practice. Mm-hmm. It doesn't happen overnight. Be patient, be kind to yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Marisa. I appreciate that. And I hope for those listening and asking those questions, you can see that it is something that you can practice and something that can come. We have another. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, sorry. I was just trying to roll through the last couple questions. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so I mean, with what Marisa was saying, it really applies to like that willingness piece of like, what are you willing to experience in order to really have more of that values-driven life? And oftentimes, what's keeping one, I guess, at bay and keeping one stuck and away from being able to do a lot of these tasks is because it seems so much more difficult than it really is. And so, like being able to, even say like a chore like doing dishes, like it may, a lot of times for some people, like just in general, like speaking, like whether you have OCD or not, like that type of task can become just very, can become overwhelming. But it also depends on how one is approaching it and how you're viewing it. But just by being able to maybe like go about it in a different way of trying to keep things simpler, it's like, and seeing that once you do it, it's not as bad as like you really think that it is. And our mind is limitless in terms of thinking of all the ways in which something can go wrong or how bad something can be, but like reality is very limited in terms of, well, reality. I mean, there's like, it's not as limitless as our imaginations can be. And so reality is much different in that things are not likely to be as bad as one expects. So once you're able to actually take the step and actually moving forward and being active and moving toward those things that are important for you, being, it's going along with this like inhibitory learning piece, and where we want to look at how did the actual outcome compare to what you expected. Like you easily can expect that it's going to be so hard, but is it as bad as you really thought? Like maybe it did cause some anxiety to to do an exposure and to move towards something important, but did it last as long as you expected? Was it really as high as you thought it would be? Like, is it cause you to be as dysfunctional or whatnot, or as you thought it might? And oftentimes the answer, it's going to be, the outcome is not going to be as bad as what you expected. And so I think that's one of the keys, to be mindful of and doing exposures or engaging activities as we're looking to move toward values and things of importance. So.
Thank you, Jelani. I want to give a quick, I was scrolling through the chat a little bit, and there was a really great conversation going on a little bit earlier tonight about feeling guilt, feeling shame, and also uncertainty, all of those different things. And one of the questions and discussions that came up was, well, is a part of accepting uncertainty, is it accepting that you will feel guilt and shame for the rest of your life? Is that a part of what this is? I've had people in the chat that are saying, this is really hard. How could I accept that I could have these feelings forever? Is that really what that means? Is that what that looks like? Is that a part of what accepting this means as a part of treatment? Chad, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about acceptance, it's not a passive resignation of things will just happen to you. It's an acknowledgement that there are different human experiences, coupled with hopefully the view that you do have some choice in what you do next, regardless of whatever has come up for you. A lot of my sessions, I might start off with people saying, especially when we're focused on values, regardless of whatever happened in the past, you could decide right now that you want to be the person that you want to be starting this moment. So, and that can come with anxiety, shame, guilt, any other negative affect or positive affect for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's so important. And just to add, there was somebody that, was asking me earlier today, they were feeling all kinds of guilt and shame for the intrusive thoughts they were having. And they were saying, I don't know, is saying maybe not, is not trying to get rid of them. Does that mean they're actually going to be there forever? And I remember my therapist a long time ago saying, accepting that this could be there forever actually is the key to potentially having the shot at getting better, where this isn't plaguing you constantly. And I remember being really surprised, by eventually saying, yeah, I'm never going to know for certain whether I am a bad person or whether I should be feeling shame or guilt. I eventually kind of stopped caring, and the values came out more than all of the questions. But I think it took that being willing for it to be there forever for it not to actually be there forever. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, if you try not to have it, then you will have it. So if you're not accepting it, then yes, the answer is yes, you will always have that if you're not willing to have it. What if I am willing to have it? I guess you have the rest of your life to see what's going to happen. That's the uncertainty piece.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Okay, go ahead, Marisa. Yeah.
I was going to say, and not knowing whether or not you can actually handle it. Like, I think that's often kind of like what the OCD is saying, is whether or not you'll handle it. And, I would say back to the OCD, let's see. Right? Like, let me see if I can live my life and feel shame. Let me see if I can live my life and feel guilt. Experiment with it.
Well, and it goes back to what you were saying before too, that we don't have to have this check happiness feeling all the time too. We can still move forward in a way that's value driven, even if we are feeling shame and guilt.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I think that also when it comes to just like experiencing emotions, like if all we felt was happy, like, I don't know, would we not take that for granted? Like, would you really know how valuable, like, maybe that feeling could be if you didn't experience like a broader range of emotions? So like, so with with the good, you get bad, with happiness, you get sad. And so like with the range of emotions, it shows you like what, can be really, how something can be valuable and importance. Like the sadness one might feel when the loss of a loved one, like shows you how much like that person or maybe pet or whatever that thing meant to you. Right. And so you, it'd be difficult to know happiness without sadness. It would be difficult to know what is good without bad, and so on and so forth with all these polar opposites. So like having all these different emotions is a healthy thing and a good thing to be able to give us more color and perspective in terms of our lives and our experiences.
Mm-hmm. I love it. And you're bringing up, it's like Taoist philosophy that you're bringing up too. This idea of yin and yang is for every single thing, we have to have an opposite, and they don't necessarily oppose each other, but they complement. You can't appreciate one thing without having the opposite. There wouldn't be happy if there wasn't these other emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's one more question on here that I want to hit, and then I'm going to have everybody do their closing thoughts. So Anthony at 816 says, any feedback when the thought slams into your thought stream as you're practicing ACT and it's so anxiety provoking, the immediate knee-jerk reaction is anger and frustration. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and he made a few other comments as well. Like there's hardly any time to process and be compassionate. Like the window's basically non-existent. So one thing I might ask people to do is make sure they're practicing self-compassion, not in response to something that is bad, whatever bad is to you. Make sure you're just practicing it so that you have it in your repertoire. It will be a little bit easier to bring out when you think you need it, if you are integrating it into just like your daily schedule. So whether that means you have to set a few random alarms on your phone that go off and you say, oh, that's my self-compassion alarm. Well, what am I supposed to do? I guess I'll write a note to myself about something I think I did right, and I'll put it in my fishbowl and I'll read it later. Build up your practice in doing that. And don't just think you need to pull it out in response to negative affect.
And one thing that I'm wondering about with this question is, so what is the anger and frustration in response to? Is it the presence of, like, say, an intrusive thought, or is it because like angry that not able to control, the experience the way that you want? Like, so I think it really depends on what the anger and frustration is directed at, and looking at, and so then, being able to apply self-compassion in those moments, like or is perfectionism even getting into this too? Is it like, oh, this is not perfect, and because it's not perfect, this is very upsetting, whatever that is. Okay, so saying both. Mm-hmm. So then being able to be flexible and be willing to, instead of like fighting that experience and like fighting like as if to say the thought can't be there and I must control this and the thought must be non-existent in order to be able to feel better. Again, like that's where we're coming into like this willingness and acceptance and allowing some space for these experiences, like allowing for space for intrusive thoughts, intrusive images, and so on and so forth. Again, these may be bothersome experiences and unwanted, but if we can allow for some space for this, then it can lead us to be much more free, to be able to do more in our lives. And a quick metaphor would be the beach ball metaphor. So if the beach ball metaphor is, so if you try to force a beach ball underwater, it's just going to continue to pop up, right? But if you can allow yourself, and the beach ball is like the intrusive thoughts, you're trying to control it. But if you can allow yourself to let go of the beach ball and let it do whatever it does, whether it stays here by you or floats away or goes and comes back in the way that an intrusive thought might, then you're allowing yourself now freedom with your hands to be able to do what you want in your space and with whatever is important. So letting go of that control of the thoughts and letting go of control of the beach ball so that you have freedom.
That's an awesome metaphor. Thank you, Jelani. Well, I think that's a great place for us to close, and I'm just going to give everybody just a second to say any final thoughts that you have that you would like to leave our audience with tonight on how to live a values-driven life. So Marisa, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I have that anger or frustration on my mind, and maybe one thing I'll just leave you with is I know when I'm feeling angry and frustrated, it's usually because I'm saying something shouldn't be as it is, right? I shouldn't be as I am. My feelings shouldn't be as they are. My life shouldn't be as it is. And I guess the question that I go to is, what is it like to live with OCD? Mm-hmm. Usually underneath anger, there's sadness. And sometimes connecting with that sadness, that grief, might actually be a way to let go and move on.
Thank you, Marisa.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Jelani, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to wrap up. And, I think one other thing that I will say just quickly is it's also important to keep in mind that when it comes to your values, live your life according to your values, not to what people say that you should value or what you see other people valuing as if that's what you think you should value. Live your life in the way that you want to live and what's important to you, and allow yourself some space for the things that even that they may not be the things that may be unwanted, but being willing to have those experiences instead of getting caught up in the struggle of them. So I guess, think of the beach ball. I'll leave you with the beach ball.
Awesome. Thank you, Jelani. And Chad?
I guess I feel pressed to try to leave on a positive note, but the mantra I'm always telling either my students or the trainees or whatever is try, fail, learn. Mm-hmm. And just make sure that you are trying new things, understand that failure might be a part of it, and then make sure that you're learning from it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Well, this has been just a great group, and this is a topic that's so important to me. So it's been an honor to be here with so many experts that I really respect on this topic. And I just wanted to leave everyone with the fact that values really made a big difference for me in recovery and being in a space where I'm more content and really healthier in my life than I've been in a really long time. And the turning point for me was when I got to the point where I was more afraid of giving up my values than I was afraid of all the things that I was afraid of being true. And that was really a switch that flipped for me of being able to say, well, I'm willing to risk all of these things because I want my values so much. And I think as scary as that can seem, it can really, really make a difference when you make that choice to move forward, not for anybody else, but for you and for your values. And I promise for all of you watching, you do deserve to live into all of those things that are important to you. So as we close out, I would encourage everyone to join the Peace of Mind virtual community at iocdf.org/peace of mind, where there you can view the live stream schedule and submit topics and questions for future events. And we have lots of great events coming up, especially next week. We're going to continue this idea of values. There's another kind of piece on living a values-driven life with our Just Ethan on Tuesday. So come back here at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Ethan. He'll be talking about this and continuing to answer questions. We will also be engaging in looking at treatment as a lifestyle in Chris's Corner next Wednesday, followed by a really fun way to live into your values, which is trivia next Thursday night. So please come and join us for that as well. So thank you for all of your questions. If you had a question that we didn't get to address, you can go to iocdf.org/peace of mind to submit your questions. Or you are more than welcome to reach out to really anyone at IOCDF, and they'll make sure to get the questions to me or to any of our awesome guests tonight at info@iocdf.org. If you need resources, please also visit iocdf.org, and someone would be happy to help you. So please remember to like and subscribe, and also remember that, again, you all are wonderful and you deserve compassion for yourself and to really live into those values that are so important to you. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.